Tuesday. Sorry I'm a little bit late, but we're diving back into Britt's story today. Excited to share more of this with you. We'll give it a few minutes here for people to log on. Hey Deborah, thanks for joining. So we'll briefly recap what we talked about last week. Just the last piece like we usually do, just so you kind of know where we left off. And then we will go into the next part of the story, which is called The Flood. So excited to share this with you. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts as we go through it. So feel free to say hi when you jump on. Thanks for joining. I'm sharing more of my story today. We're going into the 5th part of the story. It's called The Flood. So first we're going to start off with a little recap from last week, why I dumped Instagram. So I'll go through this part first before we head into the new piece. Stuck at home, I was lonelier than ever. When the pandemic struck, exercising and posting on Instagram became even more pervasive in my life. I was following an intensive gymnastic strength training program, weighted pull-ups with a 36 kg kettlebell, handstand push-ups, overhead presses, middle splits, and more. I built a lot of muscle, and I got huge. My body was inflamed from overdoing my training yet again. I was abusing my body, using training as an avoidance mechanism like I had for years, while still feeling unfulfilled and unhappy. This time, however, someone noticed and asked, "Have you ever thought about why you push yourself so hard?" No one had ever asked me that before. That question changed and perhaps even saved my life. I started examining myself, being honest about my true feelings and motivations. I looked at my history, the way I was portraying myself in the world, and the manner in which I was relating with others. I was shocked, appalled, and heartbroken by what I found when I really looked at all of those things honestly. I couldn't believe how far off course I had gotten. I had chased achievement my entire life because of the belief that success, as society portrays it, would bring me acceptance and accolades. I thought it would make me feel happy and loved. I was achieving one thing after another, each time hoping to feel like I was worthy and I was enough, and it never worked. Instead, I felt a greater compulsion to do the next thing, each time thinking that that thing would finally give me what I was looking for. The definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, which is exactly what I was doing at the expense of my body's health. It was a vicious cycle, one in which I hadn't even realized that I was trapped. It took some time, but eventually I accepted the role Instagram had played in avoiding myself and perpetuating dysfunctional behaviors. After I made the decision to leave San Diego and focus on healing, I dumped Instagram. So that's where we left off, and we're going to move into the new section of the story. Let me know if you have any thoughts or comments on that little recap in case you missed that last week, or even if you didn't, feel free to let me know your thoughts. Then we're going to go into the flood. So this is the first new part we're going through today. Here we go. Remember in a previous portion that I had read, which was called the Instagram Idol, I said that there was emotional and spiritual distress roiling underneath the surface. Well, it was only a matter of time before that distress became too much to bear. I've suppressed my emotions for most of my life. If you're an emotion suppressor like me, let me know in the chat if you can relate to that, or if you've suppressed your emotions at any point in time. Let me know if that's you also. As a child, I often felt embarrassed by my emotions. I was really, really shy, and I didn't like being vulnerable with anyone outside of my immediate family. As I became a young adult and my personal problems became more complicated, it seemed easier to avoid feeling negative emotions altogether. So I built a wall of protection around myself. Eventually, I became so good at avoiding my emotions that I had convinced myself I was completely fine and didn't have any problems. I literally thought that. I thought I had no problems. The coping mechanisms I adopted didn't make the emotions go away. I simply built up a stockpile underneath the surface, like a swelling reservoir of water being held back by a dam ready to burst. Sounds a bit catastrophic, and in many ways it was. Hi South to West, thanks for joining. Hi Inaya, thanks for joining from Monaco. I appreciate your subscribe. Yeah, Deborah said, being an emotion suppressor, I'm convinced, caused my flood a stroke. Yeah, I do not believe that there's any problem in our body that is solely like physical, like that there's no emotional, psychological, or spiritual component to it. I feel like healing starts from that level and then it moves into the physical. So, that's how it can happen. I believe it. The coping mechanisms that I adopted didn't make the emotions go away. So suppressing them didn't make them go away. I said this already. I simply built up a stockpile underneath the surface, like a swelling reservoir of water being held back by a dam, ready to burst. There were little cracks in the dam every now and then where sadness, despair, and shame would leak through. However, it wasn't until being asked that life-changing question that the dam finally burst and the flood came. All of the emotion I had held in for so long, from childhood traumas to my parents' divorce to relationship regrets, came tumbling out, and I was surprised to realize I still felt hurt and ashamed about things that had happened decades earlier. With some encouragement from a trusted friend, I decided to lean into what I was feeling, which was very scary because as somebody who suppressed emotions for a long time, feeling that much emotion and like negative emotion, like sadness and fear and shame was very scary because I felt like if I feel all these things, maybe I'll never stop feeling them. Maybe I'll just be sad and depressed forever. Maybe I'll just feel horrible on and it won't stop. So that even though that sounds kind of irrational, that was part of the fear in addition to, it's interesting for me to read this some years on and realize that, at this point, I recognize a lot of the things that still affect me from my past. And oh yeah, that's that feeling that sometimes comes up when I think about that thing or when something gets triggered with that. And it's so much more normal for me now. But back then when I started doing this, work of healing my inner self, I didn't even realize that those things were still in there, that those things were still causing, that I was surprised to find this well of emotion around these things I thought, were in the distant past. Yeah, Deborah said, anytime my emotions were allowed to come out, it was everything, not just a thing of that moment. Yeah, and I think that's what I realized in this process too, when I would, when I did when it just would come out at different times, when it would crack out, I just couldn't understand why I was feeling so sad, why I was feeling ashamed, why I was feeling all these emotions, because just like you said, Deborah, it wasn't just about the moment. It was an accumulation of things. So it didn't really make sense for my present moment, but it was because, looking back, I can see it was from all these things I suppressed. All right, so we're gonna go back to the story here, after that little tangent. So with some encouragement from a trusted friend, I decided to lean into what I was feeling. I searched for the things inside of me that made me want to cry. As somebody who often would push down the sensation of needing to cry, instead started kind of looking for like, what are those things inside of me that actually bring up the tears, that actually bring up that emotion. I pushed myself towards the places in my mind that I didn't want to go, towards things that I didn't want to relive, but felt that I had to. I let myself feel what those things had done to me. I let myself be angry at myself and everyone who had ever hurt me. I let myself wallow in the unjustness of it all. Then I forgave myself to the best of my ability. I forgave the people who hurt me to the best of my ability. Still working on that. Still working on both of those things, but that was the start of working towards it. I wrote pages and pages in my journal to myself, to other people, to God. I had massive realizations about myself, my family, and my relationships. I realized that the feelings I had bottled up inside of me had been affecting my actions my entire life. You know, they say that, they have that phrase like hurt people, that, you know, when there's no way to separate ourselves and our actions from the different things that have happened in our life that affect how we show up now. You know, if we don't address those things in some way, they're seeping in. I think the most common and obvious example of that is with family, right? Because many of us have baggage from our childhood or some difficulties in relationships with parents or siblings or, you know, whoever in our family, maybe grandparents. And it's easy to see how, you know, things from the past can easily come up and cause a fight or cause, you know, resentment and kind of cruel behavior to people that you love, but also you have this tangled, complicated past with many times. So I just feel like that, you know, all of that stuff affects how we act and show up in the world. And I think it may not necessarily affect how we, I think it does. It may not necessarily affect a more surface level relationship, but I think the deeper you go into any kind of relationship, that stuff starts coming out. Like if you haven't dealt with it, it's going to come out and affect the way that you show up. South to West said, this story really makes me think twice about fitness influencers. Are they really healthy? That's a good question. I think that many people in our world, I think we teach what we need. I think we teach what we most struggle with oftentimes. I think oftentimes people who become trainers, either maybe they struggled with their fitness and they, you know, lost weight through fitness and then they want to help other people with that because that was what they needed in order to get healthier, or it's for, excuse me, somebody like myself, there was a component of it that was kind of fat phobia and over exercising, and being a trainer lets you always just like be active, in addition to many other reasons why I enjoy being a coach and a trainer. It goes beyond that. But I do think that, you know, there can be nutritionists who have struggled with an eating disorder, and so they are passionate about nutrition. So I think in some ways that can be a good thing because it helps you and the person you're helping at the same time. And you also have to keep that in mind because nobody is a perfectly healed person. So you have to keep that in mind when you're taking advice from a coach or a fitness influencer or a nutritionist or whoever, therapist, anybody. And remembering that, hey, this person is also an unhealed person because none of us are perfect, and keep that in mind with regards to, you know, taking advice or making decisions for your own life. Elena said, praying and journaling, this is good. Yes, it's helped me a lot. So, as you can imagine, feeling so much emotion after years of numbness was scary and overwhelming, to say the least. As I told you, this was not comfortable. This was a very difficult, uncomfortable part of my life that I'm glad I don't have to relive. But in many ways, you know, I think if I had learned how to process my emotions in a healthier way, I wouldn't have to have gone through something like this because I had just kind of bottled it up and then it all like kind of exploded and I had to figure it all out. But for whatever reason, that's the way I had to figure it out. And, you know, there may be others where that's the kind of thing that just, that's what it takes for you to maybe, you know, kind of face your shadow self and face some of your problems. I felt confused about how to process all of the emotions and reconcile the person I was in the past with the person having these profound realizations. Combine that with being stuck inside and alienated from my friends, workplaces, and communities in San Diego due to the pandemic, I wasn't sure how to move forward with anything, personally or professionally. Then, one day, I had a dream. More on that in the next chapter. So that's the flood. It's a powerful one. Let me know if you guys have any other thoughts on it before we move on to the next section where I'm going to tell you about what happened in my dream that changed everything. I think it's very common in our world to suppress or bottle up emotions. I think unfortunately we don't really, unless your parents know how to teach you how to regulate emotions, and many parents don't because they didn't learn it, or they're also flawed people like everybody is, and it's difficult to understand how to process these challenging things that happen in our life, and how to let yourself feel your emotions without it completely taking over your life, but giving yourself the time and space to do it and to slow down in order to do it. Especially, I think our world in general, but I definitely know it's like this in the United States. Everything's about productive, do more to like make money and get somewhere and push your career forward. But there's not a lot of emphasis on, healing your inner child. There's some people talk about mental health, which is great. It's a good start. But, there's not really a lot of time and space for people to do kind of deep work to heal the inside and get healthier on the inside. Deborah said it's very powerful. It certainly resonates with me. I'm glad to hear that, Deborah. Elena said, let's do the dream. Elena's ready for the next section. So we'll go into that next section. So this next section is called I Had a Dream. I had a peculiar dream one day while taking a nap. Somewhere between crying and processing my emotions, I fell asleep on my bed in the middle of the day. Again, this was during the pandemic, so while I was doing a little bit of online work, mostly, there wasn't much to do, especially at the start of the pandemic. Everybody's just processing what's going on. So in some ways, it was perfect timing. Gave me the space I needed. I dreamed that my mom told me I should never have moved away from home to go to San Diego, and so my dream self decided to move back to the Bay Area, where I grew up. Upon waking from my nap, my immediate thought was, well, that's a funny dream, but I'm not moving back home. Moving back home was not something I had ever considered as an option. I liked being independent and living in a city far away from home. Or that's what I told myself. Looking back now, the more honest reason why I liked being in San Diego was that the family drama and trauma are easier to avoid when you're 500 miles away. Let me know if you can relate to that. If you've ever moved far away from your family because it was just easier, let me know in the chat. I was riding a bike several hours later when it hit me. I had to move back home. Almost all the emotions I had been processing were rooted in or revolved around my family and my parents. The obvious step forward on my healing journey was to return home and work on my familial relationships. The pandemic had afforded me much needed time to work on myself, and now it was time to see whether that work would hold up in relationship. And what better way than with the people who trigger me the most? Let me know if you can relate to that. If your family triggers you, let me know in the chat. Relocating to San Diego was a spontaneous move, an adventure in an unknown place where I didn't know what to expect. I was very much interested in developing my career and making things happen for myself. My trip back up to Northern California, however, was a leap of faith. The move didn't make sense for any practical reasons. My whole network in the fitness world was in San Diego, and it didn't appeal to me to even live in the Bay Area. Yet, there was a whisper inside my heart that said being closer to my family was necessary to become the person that I wanted to be. A thought that bolstered my decision was, it's so common for people to prioritize their career and financial success over their relationships and emotional well-being. What if I try doing the exact opposite and prioritize my relationships and my emotional well-being over my career or my financial success. I decided my number one priority was to heal my heart, so I left San Diego and didn't look back. So that's the end of that section. Let me know if you got any thoughts on that before we move on to the final section for today, which is called The Truth Hurts. I feel like this next one has a pretty cool image. By the way, I actually do have my story on my website. So when we finish this series here on YouTube, if you'd like to explore it, it's not public, but if you'd like to read over it and explore it a little more deeply, if that's helpful for you, if you're interested, you can let me know when we finish up this series on YouTube. I will let you know, and you can say, send me the link, and I'll send you the link so you can read over it again if you want. All right, we still there? How was that last section for you? How was the I had a dream? Elena said, so your family of origin and home was better to be with than being away from. I felt I needed to move back to address some of these things that were coming up. A lot of the, emotions and pain and things I was struggling with surrounded my family and my parents. So I felt like I perhaps needed to work certain things out. So, yes, I decided to move back home. Deborah said, I live far from my family, kids, sister, brother, cousins, but smack in the middle of all the in-laws. Well, in some ways, people always make kind of like jokes, or sometimes it's not a joke, that like they have a hard time with their in-laws. But in some ways, and that could be true, but in some ways, in-laws can be easier because you may not have as much baggage as you do with your own family. South to West said, I moved across the country at 22 and always missed my parents. Yeah, it's a strange thing that we live in this world where it's so easy to live somewhere far away and you can still stay connected. And it's very different, I'm sure, from like when humans were, back in the day when everybody just lived in a village and you didn't really ever probably move away from your parents. And now we live in this time where many of us, move far away and we only see them every now and again, which maybe is just part of being an adult, but sometimes it's sad. Any other thoughts before we move on, or we want to go into the last section, the truth hurts? Deborah said, good, you've moved closer to your family to work through things. I saw a lot of my parents before they passed. Yeah, I don't live in the Bay Area anymore, but I don't live as close as I used to, but I think it was definitely helpful for a time. Okay, moving to this next section here. The luster of returning home to the Bay Area wore off after a few months when reality set in. I was living at my mom's house at 29 years old during a global pandemic, and I felt completely lost. I had stripped away all of the distractions I used to avoid myself. I quit social media, left behind the shallow relationships that came with it, stopped working out, stepped back from work, and let go of obsessing over food and body image. I was flooded with realizations about myself, my family, and my relationships. Emotions and traumas that had been buried for years were surfacing as a result of my commitment to healing. I had made courageous steps towards finding my inner truth with the intention of becoming a better version of myself. The truth of who I really was, the truth of who I really was at my core was peeking through a little more each day. Something to feel good about, right? Honestly, it felt like shit. I often felt inconsolably sad and completely out of control. My emotions were like a torrential hurricane. Without achieving, without working out constantly, without using external validation to prop myself up, I was faced with the uncomfortable realizations that highlighted pain and regrets from the past and caused doom spirals of anxiety and depression. I felt horrible, like a useless waste of space. Meaningless, unmotivated, purposeless, sad, frustrated, confused, angry, ashamed, guilty. From a young age, I had fears and insecurities that caused me to believe I was lacking something that other people had. That shyness and introversion were huge flaws, that there was something unworthy and unlovable about me, and that I needed to change in order to be liked. Which, honestly, I don't really know where that feeling came from, because it's not like my parents or anyone in my family ever told me I was unlovable or unworthy. I was loved. My parents, loved me and cared for me and were not, cruel or abusive to me. But for some reason, I just felt like I wasn't good enough. I covered it all up by doing just that. I made it seem like I was confident. I was so convincing I even believed it myself after a while. It wasn't until I stripped away all of the layers of pretending I used to make myself feel worthy that I came to the truth of how badly I felt about myself deep down inside. And honestly, I've come to believe that I think confidence is kind of an illusion as far as calling a person confident. Like, I think everybody is insecure at some level. I could be wrong, but I think many of us, if we're confident, we're maybe presenting in a certain way, or in certain situations we're confident. I think most of us have insecurities and flaws, or insecurities that, there's no way that everybody's confident all the time. It's just, I don't think there's anyone that exists that way. I just don't think that's how we were made. For most of my life, I didn't believe in God. I never thought it was for me. I actually grew up quite atheist. Honestly, I had a pretty negative view of God, of religion. You may notice I'm wearing a cross. But something happened in January 2020 that is the strongest evidence I have for God. My heart opened. I allowed myself to believe in a higher power, the possibility of a higher power, and let go of the notion that I have to do everything and fix everything on my own. I asked God to humble me early on in my spiritual journey. I knew that arrogance stood in the way of my relationship with God. Humbling is exactly what I would call this time period that happened. I chose to face the deep, dark parts of myself that I was terrified to look at. The parts that made it hard for me to accept, forgive, and love myself. Through the humility that comes from my own struggle, I see that others are wrestling with their dark side too. Now I'm able to feel empathy for other people's inner battles, and I understand that we're all children of God, worthy of love and compassion. Sometimes I still feel incredibly lost and alone. Other times I have deeper realizations that put me at ease. My ability to see, feel, and recognize things in the people around me is growing as well. It's much harder to live my life this way than in the pleasure-seeking, nothing can hurt me, achievement is everything way that I was living before. But it's worth it. It's real, it's honest, it's the truth, and the truth sets us free. So that's the end of our section today. We've got, let's see, 2, 3, 4. I think there's five more sections to the story that I have written, and then we'll kind of maybe do another one where I kind of talk about what's happened maybe since those, because like I said, I wrote those some years ago. Elena said, often confidence is confused with gregariousness, which is a genetic trait. That's interesting. I didn't know that was a genetic trait. Any questions, comments, thoughts on this part of the story? The flood? I had a dream, the truth hurts. The next section that we're gonna do next week is it's called Honesty is the Best Policy. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. Any other thoughts? Elena asked, Brittany, were you reading any psychology-themed books? No. I read a lot of different spiritual books during that time. Probably one of the most influential books for me during that time, and one that I always recommend to those that are interested. I wouldn't just recommend it to anyone, but I think those who are interested in going on an inner journey or spiritual journey. I read a book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. Amazing book. Really changed my perspective. Some people think it's kind of a harsh book. Some people think it's, I guess harsh is how I would describe it. But for me, it was really helpful. I go back and read it. It's one of these great books where you can open it up to any little section. It's actually a compilation of different lectures that Anthony DeMello gave that were put together into a book. So you can kind of open to any one like little titled section. Each section is like, I don't know, 5 to 10 pages long, and just get a gold nugget from it. It's great. You're welcome, Deborah. Yeah, it's a great one. I recommend it if you're on a spiritual journey. I really enjoyed it. If you guys have any books that you, Elena, do you have any psychology-themed books that you really like? Any other questions about our story so far? Or if you have any predictions for next week and what I'm going to be talking about there, let me know your guesses. Next week we will do Monday again. This week I just was out of town, so I just set it up for today. But next Monday, see, you only have to wait 6 days until the next portion of the story, so that's a good thing. All right, well, if there's no other questions that you guys have, then that's all I have to share for today. Yeah, definitely, Elena. I'm interested. You can feel free to email it to me if that works. I just dropped my email in the chat, so if you want to send it to there, I'd be curious to hear. I love to read, so I've been reading. I got a library card recently, so I just started getting all these books and reading them. I'm a voracious reader. Love to read. Thank you, Deborah. I appreciate your support. I appreciate those of you who have been listening and following along with the story. It's kind of cool to get some reactions in real time as I read it, because as I mentioned, I sent this out to my email list before. So it was a bit of a different experience because people weren't responding in real time. I would get some cool emails though, so that was nice as well. Elena said, how did you find the religious community? Went to church? No, I did not go to church. I more recently have started going to church, but At that time, I was not going to church. I was just doing my own exploration, reading the Bible, reading religious books, and, breath work and doing a little bit of meditation and stuff like that. Gameplay channel said, why your face so long? Probably, I don't know, probably got it from my parents. All right, well, if there's no other questions or comments, then we'll probably leave it there for today, and we'll return to this, as I mentioned, on Monday. We'll get into the next portion of the story. Oh, that's weird. Deborah said, when I sent Super Chat, it threw me out. That's very strange. Well, thank you, Deborah. I appreciate the Super Chat. If you guys have any last questions, let me know. Otherwise, we will continue this story next Monday. I'm excited to share the next portion of the story. It's also a good one. Good. I'm glad you were able to find your way back. Yes. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. I'll look forward to seeing you all next Monday for the next section of the story. Thank you so much for being here, for your comments and support, and have a wonderful rest of your day.